Hi, in this lecture, we're going to look at movement and motor pathways. So this will cover a tiny bit from 13.5 and mostly from 12.8. So when we're looking at our descending or motor tracks, remember these are tracks that are carrying information down. So they're going from the brain down to the spinal cord so they can eventually go out mainly to muscles, skeletal muscles of the body. So when we look at the cord, remember we had the gray matter, which was internal, and the white matter is where all these tracks are going to be. And the white matter was in those columns. We had the anterior, we had the lateral, and the posterior columns. We're going to focus on one type of descending tract, and that would be the corticospinal tract. Now, there are somatic motor tracts as well as autonomic motor tracts. Again, we're focusing on the somatic tract because we're looking at the tract that goes out to skeletal muscles. Autonomic motor is going to go out again to your cardiac muscle or smooth muscle. So we will focus on the skeletal. Now, all of them, remember, are going to go out of the cord through the ventral roots. You might remember from the spinal cord lecture, we look at the gray matter. We had the ventral horn and we had the lateral horn. Well, the ventral horn, those axons are going out through the ventral root, and so does the lateral horn. So they're always going to exit via the ventral roots. And then remember, once they get out, they'll separate out if they're going to skeletal muscle, or they'll use those rami communicans if they're involved in the autonomic. So we're going to focus on the somatic, and regardless of which one, by the way, they both have a relay of neurons. There's always an upper motor and a lower motor neuron. So the upper motor neuron, the cell body, is up in the CNS. In particular, you might remember it's either going to be in the premotor area or it's going to be in that the precentral gyrus. And that was where we had our primary motor area. And remember that the neurons from there are going to come down the brain, and then they're going to cross over to the opposite side. And most of them cross over when they're in the medulla oblongata. So the cell body is up in the CNS. They're going to travel down to the lower motor neuron in the spinal cord, but on their way down, they're going to cross over to the opposite side. We said that the right cerebral hemisphere controls the muscles on the left side of the body. Now, as they come down, they're going to synapse in the spinal cord, and they're going to synapse in the gray matter. So they're going to travel down again through the spinal nerve, and most of these are going to be coming up from the precentral gyrus. The lower motor neuron could be in the brainstem, mainly if it's going out to using like a cranial nerve to control maybe your eye muscles. We're going to focus more on the muscles below the neck. So they're going to come down to the horns. Now remember, if it goes to the ventral horn, those are going to our somatic, right? Those are somatic motor neurons going out to skeletal muscle. If it goes to a lateral horn, then those are the ones that are involved with your autonomic nervous system. Those are the ones that are going out to your, cardiac muscle and smooth muscle, etc. So we know that the axon of the lower motor neuron is what comes out of the CNS. We'll go back to this picture for a minute. So what you can see here is the upper neurons, and they come all the way down, and then they synapse, and then it's the lower motor neuron that leaves the cord. Now understand, they're going to synapse at whatever level of what muscle they're controlling. So in this case, it's coming out to your biceps brachii, it's coming out of your brachial plexus. If it's going down to your femoral nerve, it's going to go farther down to the lumbar area, remember, and then that's where that's going to come out. So, we also worry about any damage to the lower motor neuron. If you have any issues, whether it's up in the brain, in the cord, or this lower neuron that's outside of the cord, it can result in issues with muscle contraction. The one we're learning is called the corticospinal. It also goes by the pyramidal. And the name tells you it starts up in the cerebral cortex and goes to the spinal cord. So you probably remember that those pyramidal cells, right, of the primary motor cortex, that's what we called the cells there because the cell bodies kind of look like a pyramid. So they start there, they're going to run down the brain and then cross over in the medulla oblongata, go down to the spinal cord, and then they're going to synapse at whatever level they need to control the muscles. There's two types of descending tracts. They're just called lateral and anterior. And I'm not too concerned with separating them out. Just recognize corticospinal tracts. Now, if we look at these again, you should recognize this view, the funny little map of the human body, when we're looking at the primary motor cortex. So all the cell bodies are here. Remember, those are the pyramidal cells. Their axons leave. So we call these pyramidal tracts, or you can call it your corticospinal tract. These are my first neuron, right? This is my upper motor neuron. Notice they come down and then they cross over to the opposite side of the medulla and continue until they get to the cord. Once they get to the cord, they synapse in the ventral root the ventral horn, and the ventral horn is going to have the cell bodies of your somatic motor neurons. So that's the synapse, right? Synapses are between dendrites and cell bodies. Then those axons are going out the ventral root to join up with a spinal nerve. So we have an upper and we have a lower. So we have a relay of two for our motor pathway. Now just know that really controlling muscle movements does involve other areas of the brain. So obviously the cerebral cortex, the premotor area, but just a reminder that the basal nuclei and the cerebellum are all involved with movement because they help fine-tune the movement, right? The basal ganglia prevent excessive muscle movement, and the cerebellum helps with our unconscious or subconscious muscle coordination. So this concludes our lecture on the movement and the corticospinal tract.